Welcome to the Resurrection Church podcast. My name is Bradley Cox. I'm pastor here at Resurrection Church. We're glad that you're joining us. Normally what you get on our feed is our teaching from Sunday morning, but we also do other episodes from time to time, topics, questions, and what's quickly becoming my favorite is just interviews and conversations that we're having with people. So I'm joined by one of our deacons. Cody, introduce yourself.
Well, you just did. I'm Cody Fields. I'm one of your deacons.
I try to make it easy for the deacons. Deacons
we need all the help we can get.
Deacons need help.
Every single one of us.
Yeah, glad you're here.
And we are both joined by...
One Stan Fields, as you like to say, the paterfamilias.
Yeah, my paterfamilias.
and newly dubbed
newly minted pastor of connections here at Res Church.
Pastor Stan Fields. Welcome to the
A
podcast.
strange ring to it.
It really does, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
How does it feel?
Not really any different. I mean, my routine, of course, is on its head than what I'm used to. But it's awesome. I mean, come in every day and work with people that I love to death, and
Most of the time.
no, all the time. There are some times that I tolerate them better than
Okay,
others.
fair enough.
But no, it feels great.
So I think we need to. The reason we wanted you to come on for this episode is really to just kind of tell the story, because it's not a common story. I don't think it's an interesting story of how you got to where you are. So you've been at Res for quite some time now, and people may not know though, like where you came from and how you got here.
How far back do you want to go?
I tell you what, let's do. Let's go back to, you're in Corinth, Mississippi.
Yep.
What, 4 years ago?
Almost 5 now. It was we moved here in August of 2020 during the midst of COVID.
Okay. So you're from Corinth, Mississippi.
Originally from Corinth, Mississippi. Yes.
Yeah.
And as I like to say, Corinth is a good place to be from.
Yes.
It's just a small little town. It's much slower pace of life. It's actually kind of refreshing to go back there for a while.
But then to come back.
And we were there for 6.5 years. We took care of my dad, who was 80 years old when we moved, and he lived 8 months. And then we, for some reason, stayed. Well, through certain health issues, and that's probably, we've already talked about that on other podcasts, and we can talk about that too if you want. But I don't know how much time we have. Probably not that much time. So moved back here in 2020 August. Mainly because Cody kept yelling at us, "Is when are you moving back?" And it was definitely our desire. So
I did do a lot of yelling.
you did, and so that's when we moved back. And Cody was already here, and we were quite concerned that about his
True feelings about the church are coming out.
No, we were
This is why you wanted the job.
right. We were concerned about coming into quote unquote Cody's church, right? Because he had growing up, he'd always been to church with us, and now Cody's on his own. He's married. He's found this church on his own, and was quite involved here. And we didn't want to come in and disrupt anything like that.
Yeah.
But Cody was pretty insistent that no, this is you need to come here.
Which I think
So-
is really like kind and sensitive on yours and Pam's part,
Right.
to be mindful of that.
Cody also wanted us to join his small group, and there I drew the line. I was like, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
Mainly for his sake, in case he needed to say, my mom and dad are really getting on my nerves. And, and I'm sure we do that on occasion, but we wanted to keep that freedom for him, but we did not. So we did not join his small group.
So let me back up just a little bit, because when you were living in Corinth, I think this was pre-COVID, you and I and Pam, we had started to connect and get to know each other, even with the distance, get to know each other a little bit more. Right. You guys had started listening to sermons from Res online, and you mentioned this briefly, and I don't know that we have to go into all the details of it, but you had a bout with cancer.
Right. Yep.
And the Lord was super kind in all of that, and you came through it.
Yep.
And I'd had some conversations with you. I had actually started to join you occasionally for a podcast that you were doing from Corinth.
Right.
We talked about it, and I asked you to come to share your testimony here at Res.
Yeah.
And
interesting thing is I rewatched that episode, if you will, on YouTube here recently, like in the last week, and just brought back all those memories and what was going on at that time. I was still undergoing treatment at that time, and but was past all the surgeries and that kind of stuff, and it was kind of surreal to go back and see I was heavier. And probably had more hair, but anyway.
But I remember, like, you were coming to share your testimony, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when we talked about that, we started with, okay, maybe take 10 minutes, share a little bit, and we talked some more, and I finally just said to you, just take the whole sermon, Stan.
Right. Yep.
And that may not sound like a big thing to most people, but if you've been at Res for any length of time,
we don't do that here.
Yeah.
We don't give the pulpit away.
Right. And you even mentioned that in that service.
Yeah.
That when you got up, you're actually on the worship team that day. You put your guitar down, came to the mic, said, we've got a special speaker here, and we don't do this.
Yeah, we don't. and candidly, we don't, because I've been burned.
Yeah.
One too many times. Once is enough, but I've been burned one too many times with people who have come in, and when there's just not alignment, whether doctrinally, maybe even philosophically, maybe even culturally, in terms of like the approach to ministry and the teaching of the word, it just causes problems in the church that we've determined are just not worth the risk. But there was something I felt with you that I just was like, I just want him to take it, and I want him to do it. And it felt so good. And I remember thinking, while you were up there teaching, I remember thinking, man, if he would ever move back, he would make a great elder. Because I think we were in the process at that point of moving towards a plurality of elders. Right. We were working on that because we'd never had that here before. Yep. And I remember thinking, Stan would make a great elder. And then, lo and behold, the company you worked for said, we're going to let you all work from home now.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that was it was getting towards the end of I think it was the last quarter of 2019 when I went to my boss. The company that I was working for was a small little startup that got purchased by a huge company. Mm-hmm. So we were 7 people working in what somebody had built originally to be a video arcade. And it had indoor putt-putt and a go-kart track in the back and a paintball field in the back. So it's this huge metal building with 7 people bouncing around in there like ping pong balls.
And you never took advantage of the paintball field.
Well, all that equipment was gone. But, and so I just went to my boss, who was in Calgary at the time, and I said, I have the desire to move back to South Carolina. In order to do that, I don't know if you're going to let that happen with my job, but if we could work from home and transition and the lease was coming due on this building that we were in. It had been repossessed by the bank. And I just threw it out there. I said, what if we took this little team and started working from home and closed this office? And she was like, I think that's a great idea.
Wow.
Right. So that's what we did. We made the transition to work from home at the end of 2019, just before COVID hit. And then COVID hits, and we started getting notifications on, you now have to work from home, and here's how to do it. And I was just like, we got this, because our productivity as our team went up when we went home to work. So that was not an issue at all for us. And then July 2020, we're scheduled to move. We have a contract on a house here, and I get COVID, so we have to delay the move.
I remember this.
And then so we actually finished the closing remotely, FedExing documents back and forth, and then moved into our house. I think it was August 2nd. We actually drove into the driveway, and a ton of people from Res were there to help us move us in. So we felt at that point obligated to come to Res.
That's how we hook them.
Right.
That's right. So that's how we got back to South Carolina.
Yeah.
And we, in the process of looking for houses, you guys were meeting outdoors. I remember we came to a worship service, and we stood for the last benediction, and the sweat's rolling down my back, and I'm like, this has got to end soon. But
Yeah. But I think this might end up being the recurring or the overall theme and emphasis of this podcast is just the providence of God
Absolutely.
on display. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, for you to move, for you to become an elder, for you to end up now on staff as a pastor here, a lot of things had to happen.
Yep.
And we don't always see in the moment
Yeah.
the Lord's provision for what it is. I mean, certainly you celebrated being able to work from home and move back to Greenville, but you know, it's kind of like, not apples to apples, but kind of like Habakkuk when he questions what's going on, what the Lord's doing, and the Lord says back to him, Habakkuk, if I told you what I was doing, you wouldn't believe it. And I think I stole this from Piper. I'm not really sure, to be honest.
We steal a lot of things from Piper. It's okay.
Yeah, but I say it a lot now, is that if God's doing one thing, he's doing a trillion things. And those little shifts, those little moments, those little things, like your company letting you start to work remotely and it allowing you to move back here, it opened the door.
Yep.
And so when you guys moved here and you decided to make Res your home, your church home, we fairly quickly, didn't we, moved toward you becoming a lay elder here? Like
the first thing we did was, if you remember, I think chronologically it went like this. We had been heavily involved with a member assimilation class, for lack of a better term, in Mississippi. Mm-hmm. So when we came here, we pitched that idea to you, right? You had you had a class, but it was like a 1 hour thing.
Yeah, it needed a lot of help.
And it needed a lot of help. So we brought the idea of the 4-week class, had it pretty well outlined, and we tweaked it quite a bit to make sure that it aligned with all the theology of Res, and which I was happy to do, right? Because there were some things from the old church that didn't quite line up with this church, and we fixed that, and we've made many revisions on it since. But we brought that idea and implemented the class and saw the success from that. And I think it was from that it confirmed for the church that would be the next logical step, that I would become an elder. And I remember we were playing golf and we got on a tee box and you pitched the idea of me becoming an elder, which it had not even crossed my mind. And I think I took a hole or two before I told you that I would consider it.
Right.
But how was that next tee shot?
And not good. But that had nothing to do with
It's not only business that takes place on the golf course.
That's right.
It's kingdom business.
So then it was February of, was it 22?
Yeah.
That I became an elder. So. Yeah, because it's So February 22, I believe it was, I became an elder. And then, I'm not sure if you want to talk about any of that time, but the transition to actually coming on staff was a whirlwind, right?
So before you get to that, all right. So, I think it's good to just rehearse, what is it that we're looking for when we look for an elder? I think New Testament is pretty clear. 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1, what the qualifications for elder are. Right. But we really anchor a lot of how we understand the function of an elder in Acts chapter 6. Right. When the first deacons were appointed by the apostles, which I think we can draw a straight line from the apostles to elders. Not that elders are like the apostles in the New Testament, but what we would know as the elders in a local church are downstream from the apostolic ministry of the likes of Peter and John and the Apostle Paul, right? So they say in Acts chapter 6, we can't neglect the ministry of the word and prayer
Right.
in order to meet, physical needs
Right.
that were present at that time in the early church. Not that was beneath them, but they needed help as well. So they delegated out the ministry of stewardship to the first deacons, which is how we understand your role, right?
Yep.
Because as a deacon, you're focused on,
resources and stewardship and basically the business dealings of the church.
That's right. And that's a vital role.
Right.
The church is called to stewardship as much as it's called to anything else.
Right.
And that's a vital role that you play alongside your fellow deacons.
Yep.
But elders need to focus on the ministry of the word and prayer. And what we saw in you was gifts, spiritual gifts, that lended toward that. And I think it's even worth talking about the fact that we don't do spiritual gifts test here.
Right. Right.
And why don't we?
Right. I talk about this in the class every time I teach it. We don't give personality tests or spiritual gift tests because people tend to answer those questions like they wish they were instead of how they are.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why we don't give the tests. But so how do you recognize giftedness? Is the church should recognize giftedness. Yep. You should see those gifts being used, even though the person using them may not even be aware of it.
That's right.
Right.
And so gifts being affirmed in the body, in the context of the community, we saw that in you, particularly in what became Discover Res, our membership class. We saw those gifts, recognized those gifts, and we ultimately, through a lot of prayer and conversation, invited you to become a lay elder here at Res. And you've been doing that. You've been a part of the elder team for the last 2+ years, teaching on Sunday morning, leading a small group, continuing to lead the effort in Discover Res, which, by the way, has been incredibly fruitful. Right. We've added, I think, 60 new members at Res this year, which is a lot for our size church.
And our retention rate has been through the roof
Huge.
Compared to the first 7 years I was here.
Yeah. And I think Discover Res has played a huge role, part of that.
Yep.
So we were seeing all these things, and, we have on staff Ethan, he was brought on to be our student minister, but also our minister of connection. So all things related to assimilation, as far as the staff is concerned, were under him.
Right.
But what we saw was that the role was getting too big. Like, he could not be an effective student minister and also oversee the details related to Discover Res, membership follow-up, plugging people into small groups, encouraging and equipping and supporting our small group leaders, all of our serve teams, like plugging people into serve teams. Like It was just, it was almost like a tsunami was happening. And so we realized, we need to add somebody on staff here. And this is where we talk about the providence of God. Yeah. This is where the story gets really interesting. And it's already been interesting, but it gets even more interesting. Even more interesting is that I remember in an elders meeting, we were sitting down and we were talking about the need for this additional staff person.
About how long ago did you have the idea for an additional staff member?
Like a year ago.
It was over a year ago.
Over a year ago.
But I wasn't quite sure what we needed.
You mentioned we need a new staff member. I remember that in an elder meeting. We need a new staff member. And I was like, okay.
And then it was like maybe a lead deacon.
Yeah, I thought about that. I thought about that because, like when a church starts to grow, like I guess maybe it's typical, and it's not wrong. It's just, it's maybe typical to think about bringing on kind of an XO pastor, like somebody who's going to run the business of the church.
Right.
While another is running the more spiritual side of the church, for lack of a better way to put it. And I kind of thought, well, maybe that's what we need. But the more I looked at it and the more I saw the numbers of people that the Lord was adding to our number, because this is worth mentioning too, we don't market. Mm-hmm. We don't spend money on social media. We don't, not that that's wicked, but that's just not us.
Literally the budget is $0.
$0 on promotion and marketing. But the Lord's adding to our number. And so we want to be good stewards of that. And it started to become clear to me, and I think to the rest of our elders, yourself included, we needed somebody to take over this connections piece and let Ethan focus on students.
Right. And that's when it kind of started getting a little squirrely in my mind, right? Because we were sitting in an elder meeting, and you started talking about the connections piece, and I'm like, okay, I see that, and my curiosity began to peak then, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if it was that meeting, but there was another meeting where you were still working on the job description. No one had seen it yet.
No one had seen
Right.
it yet.
But we were sitting in the room, and you looked at me, pointed at me, and said, "I need someone with stand skills." And it was like something hit my chest.
Yeah.
And
And I didn't say that because I was thinking maybe I could talk Stan into the job. It was just like I recognized gifts in you,
right.
and it was just like I didn't plan to say that, but it was just in the moment. It
Right.
was like that's what we need Stan's kind of giftedness.
And so, like, you got to understand, I've been in the software development business from writing code to managing teams since 1987.
Let's not add up
Since the 1900s.
Since the 19.
Since the year I was born.
That's right.
I'm 37. I'm not old.
That's right.
That's the year you were born?
Dash Monty Python, Michael Scott, Cody
That's right.
Fields.
Oh, wow.
That's right.
That's the year you were born for?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that long, right? And done pretty well at it. So here's another part of the providence of God. A little over a year ago, I was sitting on my back porch working from home because it was a beautiful day. So I took my computer outside and was sitting on the back porch. And a guy I had worked with in the past pings me on a text message. And it was just one of those questions like, "Hey, do you know someone who can," which was vaguely specific, right?
Yeah, right.
If that's a term. But it was obviously he threw a bait in the water is what he did. And he's like, and my hand went up, and I was like, "I do that."
Mm-hmm.
And which led to a conversation, which led to a new job that lasted just over a year, right? Leading up to this, that conversation probably happened about the same time you were thinking about, let's add a new staff member.
Yeah.
If I think about it chronologically now.
Wow. I didn't even thought about that.
Right. So I took this new job, and it was a huge bump in pay, right? You remember I was excited. I was going to be able to up my giving at church and do all these things, and I was really excited about it, and started the job. And it didn't take long for me to fall into this is not what was promised to me. This is not what I thought it was going to be, right? And I was not happy in it. So you point at me. This is a good while later. We need stand skills. Something hits my chest. I tried not to react physically. I don't know if I was able to pull that off.
I don't remember there being a reaction that I took note of.
But I took it home and started praying about it, told Pam about it. And now this is not the first opportunity that I've had in ministry, right? And which Pam has been supportive of. But if it came to changing careers, she was not necessarily supportive of that.
Mm.
But this one, she's like, "You were made for this."
Wow.
Right? So that following Sunday, you finished your first sermon of 2, and I walk up to you and I said, "Have you finished that job description yet?" And your answer was, "No, I'm going to work on it tomorrow." And I said, "Well, when you get it done, send it to me. I might be interested in that job." And your reaction was?
I almost fell. I literally was so shocked because, for someone to be open-minded to leaving a 37-year career, in and of it, to totally change. I mean, it's not like you went from IT software development to some other kind of technologically based career or whatever. Like, it's not totally uncommon for someone to change fields within reason. Right. The best example I can think of is that it wasn't a huge stretch for me once I learned to play guitar to then go play bass.
Right.
Right. Or to learn to play keys and then learn to play guitar.
Mm-hmm.
Two different instruments, but not a huge leap. Right. Because they're all strings. Now to go from keys to like the trumpet, totally different. And that's not even a great analogy, but it was just dumbfounding, one, that you were considering leaving a career that long to enter into local church ministry. And two, that you would even be open to that. I mean, given the fact that we obviously weren't going to be able to pay you what you were making at that level. And I remember I had taught that morning from Hebrews, where I'm trying to remember what text I was in, but I know that it led to us talking about not being limited and tied to certain things because of money and resources. Like if money and resources is hindering us, then shed the resources.
Right.
And I remember saying to you, Stan, I don't think we can afford you. And you said back to me without blinking an eye, well, maybe the Lord's called me to shed some things.
Yeah.
And I was just blown away by that.
Yeah.
And
So then,
that we got to go. Yeah. What happened next?
So as we started talking about this position, we thought, well, what if the position was part-time?
Yep.
Right. I could stay on at my job and we do it part-time. And then I actually got the job description, and it's long. I mean, you threw up on the page. I mean, it just went for page after page after page of the things.
You're just dictating to your phone.
Oh,
right?
man.
So there's all this stuff, and I started looking at it, I'm like, this is not a part-time job.
No.
Now, maybe I can ease into it in a part-time way.
Yep.
Right?
We would have had to make some sacrifices.
Correct. So then September 6th rolls around, which is a Friday afternoon, and I get a text message from the owner of the company saying, hey, do you have time for a quick chat? Which is never a good sign.
No.
Right?
No.
So here I am in this job that I don't love, getting a text message from the owner of the company, and I said, yep, I'm available now, and we jump on this Google Meet call, right? So I'm seeing faces, right? And they're seeing mine. And he says, Stan, appreciate all you've done for us. We've decided to go another direction.
Wow.
And my job is immediately gone. And I was like, it was just
sigh of relief.
It was just a relief that this was now off my shoulders, which it was like God saying, no, this is not a part-time gig.
Right.
You're now available full-time for this. And I felt like he was saying, I want you to give it your full-time, give it all. Right. So, and then I let you know, and you were like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, I'm not.
You're not.
I'm not sorry. So,
which is not a conversation you have very often. Is someone calls and says, hey, I lost my job. And I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. And you're like, no, this is great.
yeah. So anyway, from there, I mean, it was basically the formalities we had to go through at that point. And we did the interview with the elders and with Brian Onken, who came in and interviewed. And at that point, it was just the deacons to approve, which
minus me. It's the first time I've ever had to recuse myself.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, it was just seamless from then on, right? And you happened to be leaving the country for 2 weeks as I was starting this position, so we had all kinds of parties you don't know about.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. No, we did not.
But we did a podcast on your podcast, the Westminster. If you haven't listened to that, you should go and listen to it, about unity and leadership. And we talked about on Cody's podcast how amazing it was that I was able to leave and say to the deacons, hey, this is what I think, but you guys decide. This is how Stan feels, how the elders feel. You guys decide. And there is a check and balance in our leadership in that way. And ultimately they decided, and you were brought on staff while I was out of the country. And
The deacons did have the right to say no.
you did,
Right,
absolutely.
but that would have been unreasonable with this situation. But with the way our church is structured, there's cooperation, but there is also that check and balance.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I said when I got back, and my first Sunday back, and I stood before our church, and I wanted to celebrate with the church that you had come on staff as a pastor. And I said to the church, I said, in so many ways, and I didn't go into detail, but I said in so many ways, it was literally like the Lord, as we were praying about this additional staff and who it would be, that the Lord just went, here. Here's Stan, and he's the one.
Yeah.
And it's not like we didn't have conversations with other people about this position, but it was like the Lord was literally saying here in so many ways. And I think he was saying here all the way back before 2020. I think he was putting things in motion. I know he was, in order for it to be here. And so now I hope that as our church listens to this, they can know more detail about what I meant by that.
Yeah.
Because the providence of God making it so clear that this is what he intended for his church. It wasn't our idea. We didn't come up with it, but the Lord orchestrated all these events in order to, and prepared your heart and my heart and the other elders' heart for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's also worth exploring briefly. It's not like you come into this position with no ministry experience. Right?
True. That's true.
You've just been doing the thing
Right.
for a while, whether it's leading small groups, teaching assimilation classes, or even in the church that you raised me in, taking over our dumpster fire of a youth group for a while. Bless your heart for having to deal with that. So maybe outline some of the stuff that you've done that I also missed.
Yeah. So, and like you mentioned, the church that you grew up in. Sorry, that's an inside joke.
Joke. It's running for years now.
Yeah. So we had a youth minister who I was the deacon of youth, right? So we had a youth minister, and I worked alongside him, and he went crazy.
He did the big dumb.
He did the big dumb, and he quit. Because he could just see it coming. We were getting ready to let him go, I think, and I think that's where it would have ended if he had not quit. So he quit, and I went to the elders of that church, and I said, "Look, the kids love this guy." They did. Most of the youth, just as most youth ministers go in certain types of churches, they're kind of held high in the minds of the youth who they're ministering to, right? Because they spend so much time with them, and they should love them, right? But I told him, I said, whoever you get next, they are not going to accept, right? That's just how he's leaving this and the state of mind that they're in. I said, I'm already familiar with the kids, I already know who they are. Let me just take the youth ministry for a while, let this calm down, and then when it's time, we'll hire another youth minister. Well, I did that for seven years.
Wow.
I held that youth ministry.
You were the
position.
human sacrifice.
I was a human sacrifice, and I did it. I did it all on a volunteer basis, right? I was not paid for that. So did youth minister for 7 years, and then I don't know. At that point, we're in the process of leaving that church and going back to Mississippi, and that's another God providence thing as well. But when we got to Mississippi, got into the the assimilation class. It was actually my nephew, who was a pastor there at the time, who ran the class, and he didn't really have time to do it, and asked Pam and I to kind of take the class, first of all, critique it, and see how we can make it better. And that's how we kind of got started with the class that we now have here at Res.
Yeah.
Of course, again, with many, many, many iterations through the stuff, and we're actually making changes to the one we have now
Right.
for the next run. So, I mean, that's kind of just how it's been going from church to church.
Ministry is not unfamiliar to you.
Not at all.
But it's just that now the Lord at this stage of your life has called you into vocational ministry, and not every believer is called into vocational ministry.
No.
Like, let's just say that it's not like you've reached some spiritual plane.
No, not at all.
That all it's all of us. Your role and my role is to equip saints
Right.
for the work of the ministry. That's saints do the work of the ministry.
Yeah.
Pastors and elders and teachers equip saints to do that
That's
work.
right.
So all of us are involved in ministry, but the Lord called you into vocational ministry. And there was another little piece right around that time that your job with that company was coming to an end. We were formulating the job description here. You were expressing interest in it. We were very interested in you, and you got asked to do a wedding.
Yeah. Well, that was already in process, though.
Was it already in process?
It was already in process, yeah. So some good friends of ours from Mississippi, who she and her 4 daughters were very good friends of ours. They had actually visited here at Res. You remember that? So they'd come here. Her then husband was with her, and it was right after that they came that they split up. And that's another long story. But anyway, they had she had been seeing someone else, thought it was going to go the wedding route, and she told him, you have to get it was almost like I was her father. She said, told Brandon, her now husband, you have to call Stan and Pam and get their permission to ask for my hand in marriage. And he did. And of course we approved. What else are you going to do? Right? They're grown. He has 4 kids. She has 4 kids.
Yeah.
It's worse than the Brady Bunch.
They're practically Presbyterian at that point.
I know, right? So anyway, he gave us the heads up when it was going to happen, where it was going to happen. We actually drove to Nashville and met them for an engagement party that she had no idea we were going to be at, and then asked that I do the wedding, and got with you and got premarital stuff lined up so that we could go through that with them. And the week I started here, part of that week was going down to Florida to perform a wedding on the beach. So
but I just remember you talking about preparing to do premarital counseling with them, and then also doing the wedding. And which had you done a wedding before?
I've done, I've done 3 others before that.
Okay. So it's not like that was entirely new territory for you,
No.
but I remember you saying how energized and excited you were to do that kind of pastoral ministry. Like it was the prospect of doing that versus another job in IT, software development. It was and it's just how the Lord tends to do things, right?
Right.
It's gifts and passions align.
Yeah.
Typically.
Yeah.
And especially in what he's calling us to, because I don't just think that the Lord, this has been my experience anyway. He's never really called me away from something.
Right.
He's always called me to something.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that does mean leaving a place.
Right.
But it's always about this is what I have for you. This is the next step I've ordered for you.
Right.
And there's just no other way to see it.
Yeah.
This is the next step in your ordered steps.
Right.
God, in his perfect timing, he accomplished it. And like we were talking before we hit record, you led the Bible study here at Res this morning, and you read from Isaiah 46:10, where God says, I'm the God who declares the end from the beginning. I will accomplish everything I intend to accomplish.
Right.
It's just, I don't know. To me, this story,
according to his good pleasure.
according to his good pleasure, he has
This
great
makes him
delight.
happy to do it, right?
Yeah. Again, to quote Piper, God's a happy God.
Yeah.
He always gets his way.
Yeah.
But
It's
just
not
to,
a Res podcast without at least 2 Piper quotes.
but just to, to me, it's encouraging. I hope it's encouraging to all those who will hear this. Is that sometimes you were in a place for 12 months where you weren't happy, and that we could almost look back at that and see that as a transition. God was orchestrating something.
In my mind, I was not going to quit that job.
Right.
At least not at that point, right?
Right.
I didn't feel like I was there yet. But I do feel like as the new year's about to roll around, that had something not changed by then, I was probably going to start looking first of the year.
Right.
But, God just says, I got this.
Yeah.
I got
You
this.
think it's going to play out
Right.
one way, but I just think about Romans 8. The sons of God are led by the Spirit, and God is the kind of God who will move the entire Roman Empire to get little Mary and little Joseph from Nazareth to Bethlehem, because that's where He's determined
Yep.
His Son to be born.
Yep.
So getting him canned was small potatoes.
I just think that's something we need to rehearse, because I know what it's like. All three of us at this table and everybody that's listening to this podcast knows what it's like to be in a place where it's like you feel like there's something else, something new, something needs to change, and it doesn't feel like there's anything active you can do about it. I'm there right now. Not that I'm considering leaving Res. It's just circumstantially there's things that I just can't fix.
Right.
And I like to fix things. But I can't. And so I just have to trust that God's timing is going to be perfect. He's going to resolve what needs to be resolved exactly when He intends to, and it's going to be for my good and His glory. And that's what we trust. That's what we anchor ourselves to when we're in those periods of time where there just seems to be uncertainty and things seem to be a bit unsettled. Sometimes God does call us to move, but other times He just says, "Wait and rest. Trust me." That's what He did with you.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
so glad that you're now Pastor Stan.
I'm having a ball.
Yeah,
It's so much fun.
that's so good.
Not all of it's fun, but I'm having fun.
We're having a good time.
We are paying you to say that too, but
We're having a good time, and our church family is going to benefit greatly from it. So, thanks for sharing your story.
Yeah, glad to.
Thanks for joining us.